So where a product model can work, where you have a business owner that you compare with your technical owner, great. But if you've got something where your business is so fragmented, that isn't something where our business is ready to even understand that kind of advanced concept on how to run differently.
Welcome to Technovation. I'm your host, Peter High. Our broadcast today features a panel from our most recent Metis Strategy Summit. The topic is delivering the product operating model and mindset at scale. And the panelists are Sal Companieh, the Chief Digital and Information Officer at Cushman Wakefield, Jim Fowler, the Chief Technology Officer of Nationwide, and Diane Schwarz, the Chief Information Officer of Smurfit WestRock. The session was moderated by Metis Strategy Vice President and East Coast Office Lead, Andrew Crucell. I hope you enjoy the conversation.
I am very excited to be sharing the stage with three amazing executives here. So as Stephen just said, to my right, Sal Companieh from Cushman Wakefield, a $9.5 billion commercial real estate company. Started with the CIO title, but now has added digital to that in the last 4 years. And certainly over the last 5 years with COVID, changing commercial real estate market, et cetera, a wide variety of interesting perspectives I'm sure we're gonna get from you. So thank you, Sal, for joining us. To her right, Jim Fowler, CTO at Nationwide, the $54 billion insurance and financial services firm that Peyton Manning reminds me of every weekend on Sunday. And also on the board of directors at Lumen Technologies, a telecommunications company based in Louisiana, and one of the many illustrious GE alumni as well in the room, as we discussed before, 20 years in various CIO and leadership roles there as well. So Jim, thank you for joining us. And to his right, Diane Schwarz, who is the CIO at Smurfit WestRock, the $21 billion result of the merger between Smurfit... 32, excuse me. Between Smurfit Kappa and WestRock, local to my hometown of Atlanta last year. And before that, held a number of CIO and CDIO roles at On Energy, Johnson Controls, as well as several others as well. Bell Helicopters is in there, which we would love to hear more about too, but thank you, Diane, for joining us. So the topic that we want to discuss is operating model. So we're actually not going to talk about AI explicitly for a little bit, which is great. But we're at this really interesting convergence of kind of technical uplift, both on tech stack modernization as well as AI enablement, that keeps pushing large organizations to move faster and faster. And one of the ways that I think you can address that speed is by also looking at your operating model. At what point is it not the technology that's slowing us down, but it's the people in the process that go along with that that we need to enable in order to really take advantage of that. And so what we'd love to dive into in this conversation is how do we explore the product operating model in particular at scale? How do we use that product-driven thinking to drive speed and agility? And so, Sal, I'd love to start with you and maybe get your thoughts on, first off, why the product operating model? Why is that the model of choice for you going forward? And what are some of the kind of realities that you need to face before starting that journey?
Yeah, sure. First of all, thanks for having me. Just to give context a little bit to commercial real estate and Cushman & Wakefield, we're about 60,000 colleagues. Think of them as professional services, highly matrixed, highly globalized, but 6 totally different businesses and different digital acumens, as well as just the talent profile being significantly different. And so for us, the product operating model served 2 core purposes. 1, creating proximity to the business, and 2, clarity of decision-making rights. And so the way that we approached it from the onset was to do an evaluation of how prominent our technology organization's capacity and capital was in informing and driving revenue when we first started this about 2.5 years ago. And the result wasn't great. And so we made a pivot into this operating model to basically operationalize permanent agitation of thought. So there's a technologist at the table defining our product go-to-market strategies, how we show up, the digitization of them, but then also just to drive really, really deep pairing with the business. The way we've defined it within our organization is there's a business product leader as well as a technical product leader that co-create together. And so that proximity to revenue started to build trust for us, right? So there was no longer an actual technical operating model and a business operating model. It was one strategy supporting operating model. And that's what we've been able to scale throughout the entire organization now, 2+ years into it. We'll talk later about what that means to our financial management and how we show up for investments.
No, that's great. And I love the kind of connection with the business partners so explicitly, that proximity to revenue as you describe it. And Jim, if I can turn to you, I know in some of our previous conversations, you'd mentioned that you have used the product operating model to go after some pretty audacious goals that you've set for your organization. And so maybe talk a little bit more about why and what some of those goals might be and are, and how you're kind of tackling those going forward.
Yeah, one of the big changes that we've kind of, like many of you, taken this year is we've kind of picked 10 different big bets that we're making with the technology change. That's AI plus ubiquitous connectivity plus advanced compute and how we think it's going to drive the business. And rather than have it be 2,000 experiments rolling up from the bottom that weren't scaling, we said, hey, let's pick 10, 2 for each of the C-suite, that we're going to set a big goal. So for example, in mine, it's a 50% reduction in the cycle time for software development as measured with our productivity measures. But each, we have an underwriting goal, we have a claims goal, kind of the same thing. And what we're realizing when we look outside is technology is changing not just within our company so quickly, it's with our customers and with our partners. And the speed of change of our old model and methods of working wasn't keeping up with the demand that was coming in from them. And so I actually learned this from David Burr's business before it was called Agile and before it was called the product operating model. The CEO of that business put these cross-functional teams of people together, and they gave them a problem to solve. And every week, the leadership team would come in and they would challenge them and say, hey, what would you do with this? And they were empowered to make decisions locally. They were cross-functional in nature. There wasn't an IT team and a finance team and a business team. There was a cross-functional team that was working on the problems. And what I learned from watching that is you could get speed of action because you gave them the ability to make decisions quickly. You gave them a process with which to escalate. And it didn't fit everything, but when you had incremental pieces of change that we were trying to make over time, a little bit at a time, it was a great structure to, again, match the speed of what we're seeing from an industry perspective with how we operate inside the company.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. And certainly between both of you and your responses, it is that means to more business agility in certain contexts, and certainly can drive some of that cross-functional delivery. But Diane, I want to turn it to you and maybe ask a more critical question, and where can it go wrong? Where does the product operating model maybe not fit appropriately, and where do you need to exercise a little bit of caution before starting that journey?
Yeah, so the business has to be really of a state of maturity where you can have those conversations. And I was paging through the operating model booklet on our table, and it talked about how in a really great fine dining curated restaurant experience might define a product team, as opposed to a catering example is maybe what our teams are used to delivering. And I have to tell you a story, and we'll bring it back to the business in a minute. So one of my teams is located in Reims, France, which is the Champagne region, and they said, let's not even go why I have a team that is located there. But there was a 3-star Michelin restaurant, and I was traveling by myself, and they said, you need to go. And I went, and I had the most amazing orchestrated experience. It was like watching a ballet in terms of the whole experience to what they did. I loved it. I thought it was amazing. So I come home, my husband and I don't know, we go on a trip or I take him out or whatever. I'm like, oh, you need to experience something like this. Well, there is no Michelin anything in Dallas where we live, but at least figure, let's at least get him a 1-star experience. Well, I should know better after untold 30-something years that there's only 5 things he'll ever order from a restaurant, regardless of where we're at and what we're eating. And he had the most miserable experience because it was such a mismatch for where his mindset was at. He doesn't want the service. He doesn't want the fine dining. He doesn't want a QR code menu. He wants his 5 things that he can choose from. So let me bring it back to the business. How many of our business colleagues are like my husband, where I don't want it? You're not going to be able to change me. And, to the point in the earlier panel on of us needing to be those human chain transformation agents, great. Yeah, not everybody is actually changeable or transformable. So where a product model can work, where you have a business owner that you compare with your technical owner, great. But if you've got something where your business is so fragmented, so for example, ours is an owner-operator model, so every general manager of a paper plant is, they can make all of the decisions about how they run. That isn't something where our business is ready to even understand that kind of advanced concept on how to run differently. So that's a very long answer to how it doesn't fit.
No, that's great, Diane. Thank you so much for the analogy as well, because it has to mesh, especially Sal, as you were talking about with your business partners. You need to make sure that you're both on the journey together. And Jim, I want to turn back to you and ask a very pointed question on where maybe you run into some of those complications about meshing, and that is with finance. It's something that comes up over and over again when you talk about the product operating model, is like, how do I get finance to come along this journey with me? And so I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on how to approach that challenge and maybe some tips and tricks that you have to make it work.
I think the discussion of business partner is a good lead into this one, because this is probably one of the hardest parts is to get through, and kind of timely for me because I literally had this conversation with our CFO last week. When you talk product operating model with a CFO, what they hear is, oh, you're just going to put a big chunk of money into a product or a business unit and they're going to spend it and they're going to waste it. And that's what they hear, waste. And in the conversation that I've been taking our CFO down, I think you've got to have finance have the thought that this is more like the Warren Buffett style of holdco, where, look, this is a lot less corporate oversight, but corporate oversight has a couple of big responsibilities. One, if you think about your business units, you're going to set targets for growth. What do you want sales and revenue to be? What do you expect their rates of return to be? What do you expect the operating income they're going to achieve? What cash expectations do you have? You ever kind of study how Warren Buffett manages the businesses they own? That's what they set from the top of the house, and you meet those targets or you're not in the job. And now here's the rest of the story. If you generate more than they're asking, that's your right to reinvest in your own business. And so my discussion with our CFO has been about this, to say, look, you care about a risk-adjusted rate of return, you care about net operating income, and you care about capital and cash. Set those targets for the business units and then give them the autonomy to be able to decide how to meet those. If they don't meet them, we should go, right? That's a different discussion. But as long as they're meeting those and they can achieve those and beat those targets for you where they're generating their own cash for investment back in their own products, then we have a set of goals and objectives that are very aligned. And so I think you got to turn that finance discussion. That's a really important one. You can't make this work without that buy-in from finance.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Jim. Thanks for that. And Sal, I want to turn to you because I think building on Jim's point around the nature of the relationship with finance, as well as what we were talking about with the business partners, I think in our prep conversation, you said the words, start with the money. And that was, where you really kind of build momentum for this sort of transformation. And so tell me a little bit more about like what that means for you at Cushman Wakefield, starting with the money. And then I know that you have a maybe unique way about going about funding that I think would be fantastic for the audience to hear as well.
Yeah, just to build on Jim's response, what we ended up doing was going to a full transparency model with the business. So the first 6 to 9 months I was in seat, could quite literally not make it out of a single conversation around financials without being told we're too expensive, we're wasting capacity, why could we possibly need that many more people, et cetera, et cetera. So we made a strategic decision that the only investments we would submit from the seat of the CDIO would be cyber and infrastructure. Every other investment had to come from the business units. And so we started to actually separate out investment strategy planning with the geography of the budget. So the budget will still sit within our P&L, but the actual investment ROI calculations, et cetera, are truly true enterprise ROI calculations. And so it requires the co-creation to come to life far in advance of actually delivering a product. It's the ideation of the transformation that we're going after. We knew we didn't want to do a ton of incremental, quite simply just because of where we were as a company, our maturity. We're a 100-plus-year-old brand, highly built based on large-scale acquisitions. with a brand new board, brand new CEO, with a hyper focus on growth. So that intersectionality requires us to work like a symphony. And that what we did is to enable that was to bring to bear this concept of the business fronted, both the product operating model as well as the financials. And this past month was the first year after about a 1.5-year cycle where 100% of the technology investment came from the business. And it is honestly one of the most rewarding parts of the job is to sit back and just watch them do it. And the money will float once the approvals are in place to the P&L of the technology organization to manage, to deliver against, and to actually contractually obligate ourselves to the returns. But the fundamental storyboard is different, both to the board, to the executive committee, and actually that creation of trust amongst ourselves. When the finances are co-created, the actual product outcome is actually just a build upon that. So we've had tremendous success in that transition.
Yeah, thanks for sharing it. It's such a great way to really like force the collaboration and the cross-functional teams. You know, you make sure that they truly are the ones signing the check and they're at the seat at the table. And so, yeah, I think it's such a interesting and clearly rewarding model that you guys have done. So thanks for sharing that. And I want to go back to Diane now. You know, when we're talking about the financials, I know from our previous conversations, you have some unique ways to make that a little bit real to your team. So never mind at the executive level, how do you make the financial conversation real for the teams that are within your organization itself? But then what do you also do like when you get stuck? You know, say to your point, like you're in a part of the business that maybe isn't as mature. What do you do? And how do you kind of navigate that or maybe redirect attention elsewhere?
Yeah, so one, first on the how do you make it real, is I try to equate whatever we're spending our money on to what does the business need to do to be able to pay for that. So the easy example was when I worked at Bell Helicopter, because the lowest model of Bell, I think it was the 206, I've been gone for a while, forgive me, the list price was about $1 million. And the net profit on it was about 10%. So great. If you sold one of these helicopters, you got $100,000 of profit. So anytime there was a project, you're like, great. Then how are we going to enable the sale of, 5 new helicopters to be able to pay for this? And that really makes a lot of, brains turn on their side in an IT perspective to figure that out. Well, now in my latest business where you're talking about, hundreds of millions of boxes where maybe your profit margin is a penny or a dime, depending on what it is. We have a large-scale SAP program we're rolling out, and I asked my team, how many plants profit, how many boxes do we need to sell and manufacture to pay for your 5-year program? My team still hasn't gotten back to me with that particular answer. They've actually gone to the CFOs to try to answer that too, and they can't. But well, now I'll take you to kind of a little bit of the creative problem solving, because a lot of times when we're dealing with these operating model shifts, it can be perceived as a switch from a CapEx to an OpEx model. I don't know about any of your CFOs, but no CFO that I've ever worked with wants to move anything from balance sheet back into the operating side. In other words, they want to put as much and stuff on the balance sheet as they can. So at Johnson Controls, we had one product team that worked pretty well. But the finance team wanted us to capitalize everything, and this team was trying to run things in sprints, and we're like, we can't go do a CapEx for every sprint we're going to do. I said, wait, we do the same amount of work, we do the same amount of capacity every year. Let's just say it's $5 million, whatever. Fine. We put in a CapEx through the CapEx planning pipeline and agree that we're going to allocate $5 million. And then finance and everybody else, and then after the fact goes back and figures out, okay, which piece are you going to capitalize when? When is it work in progress? And when are you going to move it out of there? So it's like, just because you are in a product model and just because you are in sprints doesn't mean everything has to be OpEx. Just sometimes need to take a step back in how you align your CapEx planning processes with that, and educate finance to say, let's not think about this discretely. We spend this much amount of money every year doing stuff. It's just a matter, what is that stuff going to be? And we agree on that. So maybe less polished as the conversation that you just took us through. But sometimes when you're making boxes, polish doesn't work.
No, I love that, Diane. And you know, no one loves to talk about finance, right? But it is, as we contemplate this question of like, how do you scale the product operating model, or how do you address any sort of operating model transformation? It's such a key component of it. And you have to sometimes think in year timeframes. To your point, you know, it takes time because finance is run on an annual basis to make those changes over time. So not everyone's favorite topic, but incredibly important when it comes to scaling these ideas. And so I would love to spend the last portion of our conversation talking a little bit less about the structural things where we started, or finance where we're at in the middle, but the cultural and mindset shift that comes along with this as well. You know, we've heard from many leaders today around some of the cultural and mindset shifts that are required for AI adoption, but there's certainly, if not even more so when it comes to the operating model, cultural and mindset shifts that need to happen in order to enable the organization to kind of break out of, you know, some of the ways that they've worked before. And so, Sal, I would love to start with you and, you know, ask the question kind of, at what altitude are you flying when you need to answer some of these questions and do some of the change agents? And whether it's the board or the individual contributors or the C-suite itself, kind of like, how do you see yourself fitting into that ecosystem and manifesting some of that change that the organization needs?
You guys know that ride, the Tower of Terror, where it takes you up and just dumps you down and you don't quite know what's happening? That's the reality of our jobs these days. And I feel quite literally like I am with my kids during that ride, which is one, there's a tremendous amount of surprise that you need to neutralize, because no matter what we're doing, we're going to continue to see these changes and paces of change coming through. But I was joking around with Mike that I genuinely feel like our seats are the organizational psychologists these days, right? So you have to remove fear from the executive committee of it happening too fast, it's happening to us, versus we're actually on a journey together. You have to actually educate your own teams on their future state, where they need to play, how the rules of engagement are different, right? They do need to actually lead from a strategy perspective very differently than they historically would have in a more delivery operating model. And for us, the biggest element of success has been this super unique balance of agitate and educate. And so giving the freedom with the executive team to be able to say, no, I'm not sure that you're thinking about it broadly enough. What about if we do it this way? Which means we've had to take the term co-creation, which historically was we did it very deep proximity with the business, and take it to, we're going to do 80% build, and you're going to help us with the last mile of opportunistically enabling you as a business to generate the revenue and the EBITDA that you need to do. And that pivot, you had to spend the first year and a half to get the trust, to earn the seat, to earn the trust and the financial transparency, to then show up and actually co-create this way with them. But we're on that journey, and it's different for every business line, is in their own little synopsis of the maturity curve. But just honoring the fact that we're all kind of going through this process together and being able to see it through their lens of, to your point, financially, what do they need to do to survive and meet their growth targets, and what is our role in that, and how do we actually bring them along on that curve?
Great, yeah, and I love the organizational psychologist role that the chief technology officer can play. And you know, maybe kind of pushing it to you, Diane. You know, in that same vein, you know, like as you look at the organization, how do you begin to understand whether or not they're ready or not from a cultural and mindset perspective? You know, I know you've already talked a lot about from an organization and how the business is structured side of things, but how do you get a little bit of insight into whether they're kind of like mentally ready for that sort of transformation as well?
Yeah, so in the new Smurfit WestRock business, it was two $16 billion entities that now have formed into 3 regional entities with a slight group or corporate overlay. And one of them is North America, highly centralized, very just, you know, working in a kind of a US-centric model, has had IT business partners, has some agile teams, like they get it. And I am trying not to mess with their mojo because it works. In our European business, so again, these are new business models from a regional perspective. They've never had a CIO dedicated to them. They don't have IT business partners. They don't know what those concepts are. So there's a lot of listening, learning, talking, observing, and recognizing that one size fits all doesn't fit anyone well at all. So I do have a CIO that we have recruited for the European business unit who starts January 1st. Thank God, it's been the longest year of my life being without that role. But the business doesn't even know what to do with that person, that role, because they've never had it. So it's like, I don't know, let's say that you have kids that are in 5th grade and they've been latchkey kids, and they go home and they fend for themselves and they know how to like get Pop-Tarts out of the pantry. I don't know. And then all of a sudden, now you have a nanny or an au pair or, I don't know, a stay-at-home spouse that can actually cook for them and give them snacks and give them supervision and give them rides. Like, what do they do with adult supervision? They don't even know what to do with it. So this is what's going to be going on with our European business. And it's like we have to be adaptable to the organization and figure out what level it's ready for. I don't know if that answered your question.
No,
that's
it
my story.
did. Yeah, I love the continuing analogies here, and we all need a little bit of adult supervision time to time. No, thank you, Diane. And maybe kind of building on that, and Jim kind of bringing us to a conclusion here, where there's fertile ground in your organization for this sort of mindset shift, in addition to everything else that we've talked about, like what are some of the techniques that you use to kind of help them along and accelerate that transformation? What are some of the things that can potentially work to solve the cultural side of things as well that you've seen work?
Yeah, so within Nation, we have about 400 lines. And within the 400 lines, there's about 60% of them that are operating as product teams. And what we found is the same techniques that we used when we implemented Agile, the same techniques we used when we moved to cloud, work here. So coaches, we have a small group of coaches locally that know what it takes to actually implement a product team and how to make it work. We have the idea of dojos, where we'll actually invite the teams in and take them through an exercise that teaches them on how they have to change the way that they work to be able to kind of fit in this model. And so for us, it was going back and looking at what has worked in other change management exercises that we've done before and making sure that we were providing kind of a centralized group of people that could kind of drop in, provide the resource, and get out. I'd say what's inherent in that is this is not some centralized large initiative. This has to be grassroots. It has to happen from the lines. They have to desire the business partners that own the customer-facing side of the product have to be bought in. And so the other thing that we did is really just focus on the coalition of the willing and let the benefits that they're seeing kind of pull other lines into scope.
Oh, thanks, Jim. And so maybe to bring this all together, and it sounds like when we think about the product operating model at scale, it's easy to apply this sort of thinking in pockets, but there are certain things, whether it's financial, whether it's organizational, whether it's from a mindset perspective, that you kind of do need the reality check on before you start the journey and have the tools in your toolbox to address those. The pathway to greater business agility and innovation is there, but it's not always going to be applicable to every part of the business. But where there's fertile ground, Jim, to your last point, how do you nurture it? How do you feed it? How do you make sure that you have people that you can rely on to effectively scale that model where it's going to flourish? And so hopefully everyone who's in this audience is somewhere along this journey themselves and can take away some really interesting tidbits from this panel. But I just want to end by saying thank you, Diane, Jim, Sal, for your thoughts and insights, and we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.